Hello and welcome to the Infinite Financial Freedom Podcast, where we empower you with financial literacy and guide you on your journey to financial freedom. I'm Josh Metal, and I'm here today with Stephen Flood, CEO of GoldCore. Stephen and his GoldCore team frequently appear in international media such as CNBC, Bloomberg, CNN, Wall Street Journal, Associated Press, Reuters, and now the Infinite Financial Freedom Podcast. So we're grateful to have him with us. And he also often takes a position or part of the Bloomberg and CNBC gold surveys, as well as the Reuters Precious Metals Poll. So certainly he is an expert in this field. And after his degree in business at the Portobello Business College in Dublin, Ireland, which is where he's joining us from Ireland today as well, Stephen began his career in finance. He held financial and trading posts in New York before joining Goldman Sachs as a sales trader in equity derivatives. Later returning to Ireland from the US, he put his experience in trading, risk, and financial markets at Goldman to good use. His entrepreneurial drive led him to eventually join and now become the CEO of GoldCore. Stephen now leads a group of professionals who advise clients on gold and silver purchasing, which, little known secret, I have been a gold and silver bug since the Great Recession. And so I'm super interested to welcome Stephen to the show. And with that, how are you today, sir?
I'm wonderful. And it's great to be here, Josh. Thank you so much for the very kind introduction there. You're a generous man.
I appreciate you very much being with us and sharing your perspective. And so it's 11:18 a.m. here in Park City, Utah. It's 6:18 p.m. in Ireland. And so we're on the other side of the time zones there. I appreciate you joining us. And let's just jump in. Your background is super interesting to me, Stephen. So just walk us through a little bit about your journey from Ireland to New York and back, and just bring us up to speed on your journey, if you would.
Yeah, well, I suppose since from an early age, I've always had an interest in business and entrepreneurship. Like yourself, I had some humble beginnings. In fact, I think you started off humbly and then became very successful. Our family actually enjoyed quite a lot of wealth at one stage, and then we lost it all through the 70s and 80s. And then my mother, who hadn't actually worked in a kind of a formal job up until in her 40s, circumstances forced her to go back into the workforce, and she became an entrepreneur in her own right and bought a small bed and breakfast in Dublin city centre. And I spent many of my formative years watching her operate that business. Making beds, making breakfast, talking to wonderful American tourists, and learning about the world through the eyes and experiences of our guests. And I always found it really fascinating. And I used to love talking to everybody, and it was a great time. And we didn't have a whole lot. We had to work hard for every penny we got, and we really enjoyed it. So it was a great experience. When I finished college, I made a beeline to New York City to find my fortune. And my first experience there was working for a pump and dump operation, which I think was actually later to be found to have run by the New York mafia. It's very similar to that famous movie, The Wolf of Wall Street. But I worked there for 2 days. I realized what was going on because they were only ever selling and pitching 2 different tickers at the top of the room. And it was a total scam. So I left there. I became a painter for about a month or 2, and I wasn't a very good painter. My friend who ran the painting company, he used to tell me to be quiet, that he was paying me from the neck down to do the work. So it was just like, it was very funny. Hello, Kyle, if you're watching. And it was a great education as well. But then I got a job in Bankers Trust, which was an extraordinary organization, and at the heart of kind of financial development in New York at the time. Like the first options contracts were actually developed in Bankers Trust. I think Black-Scholes is the options pricing algorithm that's used by the financial industry, and they worked, or one of them worked at Bankers Trust. They got like significant awards for that work. Changed the world of finance, arguably. So I worked there. I was really good at financial technology, loved computer systems, loved diving into technical problems, and bankers was a great place to be. So I learned a huge amount about financial products, the markets, risk, and they gave me a free rein to develop and work on solutions. And I spent so I cut my teeth, so to speak, there, working in the middle office, back office, and then working on the trading desk for equity arbitrage, which was an incredible experience. Where you're basically looking at different sectors of the market and you're trying to make money on the spread. You'd short one side of it, you'd go long the other side, and you'd make money doing that. So I learned a lot there. And then I found my way to Goldman Sachs after Deutsche Bank bought Bankers Trust, and I worked at Goldman, which was an incredible opportunity too. They just opened the doors to non-Ivy League type graduates, so they're taking in people from the street for the first time. So I was part of that cohort who came in. And it was incredible because it's kind of it was an evolving organization at the time, and it had a very kind of traditional approach to everything, very bad technology. And so when I came in with other people, we had this kind of more kind of street edge to us. We were able to disrupt things greatly. And because there's such a fantastic culture there, they were very open-minded about that too. And they'd just gone public as well, I think a few months before, or a year before. And so I spent a few years there working at Goldman, and I worked in the on the sales desk of sales trading desk of equity derivatives in the program trading area. And I met amazing people, and it was an incredible experience. But then after about 7 years in New York, and you work hard, I just got married, and I was like, you know what, this is not really where I want to spend the rest of my life. I don't want to, be, I suppose, exposed to the banking system and the vagrancies of banks. Some days they're on high and then they're on the low, and I didn't want to set up family and rely upon that income stream. So I, myself and my good wife Paula, we headed back to Ireland via around the world. We did a round the world trip for a number of months, had an amazing time as well, and made our way back to Ireland. And after about 2 years back home, I joined my old school friend Mark, who had set up GoldCore after a few months, and he needed some assistance in various different aspects of the business, website, and technology, and I just dove right in, and I loved it. And for 17 years, we ran the business together. And Mark recently sold his share in the business about 2 years ago and left me in control. And we've been expanding, very, very well since then. We have, I think we manage around $300 million now in assets around the world for our clients. And we're 20 years old as an organization next October. And we're really proud of that, because only 3% of companies actually make it to 20 years. I didn't know this until recently. So we're very proud of that. Our team is absolutely incredible. They're very, very client focused. And that's not a cheesy sales line. We are nuts about our clients. We really do everything we can to deliver for them. And about 10 years ago, we started asking every client to give us a rating, which goes up on our website. We don't have any control over it. So they say bad things about us, it goes up there in lights. And we have just passed the 3,000 review mark, and we're a 4.9 out of 5.
Wow.
Over 3,000 reviews over 10 years. So I'll nail my colors to the mast. We are the best precious metals business in the world. We are the most client focused at what we do, and we always deliver. It's a great honor. It really is. We enjoy every day. We love our job.
It's a beautiful story. I appreciate you sharing that. And we're going to, at the end, definitely get some contact information for you and for GoldCore. But this part of your story that I found actually particularly interesting was around your family having it seemed like in the middle of your mother's life, having some sort of financial calamity. And so I wonder if you'd just be kind enough to share, what were the major takeaways as you reflect back on that? Like what have you decided to do personally different to ensure that type of a situation didn't happen to you and your family?
Yeah. Well, my family, my children are quite young. Well, they're not young. They're 18, 17, and 15 as we speak. And they're great, but they're still formative. They're still looking at me and learning, and I learn from them as well. It's the greatest honor I've ever had, is to be a dad. But I think looking back then, I think my mother had an incredible resilience, even though, things might be going really bad. There was terrible currency crises back then, and interest rates would go extraordinarily high over week to week. with various different things, and our interest payments would grow as well. And we didn't have any money, and we had to try and make our mortgage payments. And it was so bad. We'd myself and my sister Georgie, we would be sleeping in the basement of the guest house. We had our room there and everything like that. But when the weekend came and you had guests calling to the door, we'd give up our beds to give it to guests. So we'd make that just an extra bit of money. And we'd sleep on the kitchen floor of the guest house on mattresses, and then we'd get up, put the mattresses away, and then make breakfast. And we'd come out of the kitchen, looking happy and smiles. The guests wouldn't have a clue, but it was kind of like behind the scenes. But I think the lessons I learned is resilience. I love Nassim Taleb. He's a famous writer, and he wrote a book called Anti-Fragility, which I think is a really important concept. Which basically, as human beings, we become stronger through adversity. And yes, things are bad, and sometimes things go really, really awful. But time moves on. Things will pass. This will pass. I always tell my kids this: if you're really depressed, just say that to yourself. This too will pass, and things do get better. And you have to have a positive outlook. And only with a positive outlook can you see opportunity. If you don't have a positive outlook, you won't see opportunity. Even if it comes right beside you, you will not see it. You're blind to it. So my lessons from that time is resilience. Just roll with the punches and get up and keep going and enjoy your life, because we're so fortunate to have the lives we have today, our health, our friendships, our education systems. It's never been better for this generation of people, even if you look back over time. So I think we're very fortunate, and the things we suffer pale in comparison to previous generations and our parents and our forebears and what the lives that they led, So I think that's the way I kind of look at it.
I love that the lesson that you pulled out of that was an inside game lesson, right? It was this too shall pass. And if we're not in a place of, you didn't say gratitude, but what came from me was gratitude and opportunity mindset, then we could literally walk by money laying in the streets. So I love that you came away from that from an inside game tactic versus just a monetary external tactic. That was great. That surprised me, Stephen. I thought you were going to say something totally different, and I loved what you said there. So, money. What is money? They say the money is the root of all evil. People have very interesting ideas of what money is and what it means. So perhaps you could give us an explanation and maybe a little bit of history about fiat money systems and how you think about money.
Yeah, well, money, there's only one thing called money, and that's gold. And silver has been money at times, but gold primarily has been money throughout history. Everything else is currency, and currency is a derivative of money. Typically, currencies are issued and they're backed by money, gold. And that was pretty much the case throughout most history, through a lot of different cultures over time. And arguably, the British Empire, it's the stability it brought to developing economies around the world in the 1800s and the Industrial Revolution was in part based on the strength of its currency, which was in large part backed by gold. And the rate of gold to the pound, I think it fluctuated around 40% when it was first put in place back in the 1600s. And then it was watered down at different times, and they left the gold standard, and then they had crises, and then they went back on the gold standard. But essentially, what fiat money is today is currency backed by the tax-raising power of our governments, and it's not backed by anything. It's backed by a promise. And that can be okay sometimes, to have a currency with a government that's stable, that is very fiscally responsible. But I would argue, and it's just my opinion, and probably that of most reasonable people, that our governments have lost their way, and they have decided to abuse their authority by printing money and by issuing too much credit, and also controlling interest rates for political reasons. So back in the 1990s, actually, when I landed in America, about a year after that, they repealed an act called Glass-Steagall. I don't know if you've ever come across Glass-Steagall, But this was an incredible piece of legislation that went to the heart of the original stock market crash in the 1920s. And there was boom and bust cycles around those times as well. And what they realized back then was the financial system is incentivized to lend money, but if they're also selling product, they're going to lend money to get the client to buy more product. So they're going to make on the lend and they're going to make on the product sale. And this is a vicious circle, and it's not productive, and it's not a good use of our capital assets. So the problem we have today is that since 71, Nixon pulled us off the gold standard, and now the dollar is not backed by anything. And as such, no currencies around the world are backed by gold. They're just backed by promises. And it means that you can have a lot of money printing, which leads to inflation. Always. I don't care who you are. It will always lead to inflation. And that's what we're seeing today. It's not Mr. Putin's fault. It's not necessarily the war in Ukraine. This is a monetary experiment, and it's global. And it's been on its way since the last global financial crisis, I think, is when they really accelerated money printing. I think it's about $20 trillion they've generated out of nothing. So when they do that, and this is really important to remember, you're a businessman, I'm a businessman, we pay our taxes, and when we put our after-tax income into our savings accounts to pay for our kids' education or whatever it is, we paid our dues, we paid our taxes. That's our money, our buying power that we should keep. But when we print money, they actually reduce that again. And I'd argue that's called taxation. And it's taxation without representation, which is exactly what happened in Boston, the Tea Party. It's when the King of England decided to tax the American colonies without representation. So I hope what happened then happens again, and these people get thrown out on the street because what they're doing is they're stealing. They're actually taking value from people who've earned it rightfully and using it for their own purposes, political purposes.
Yeah, I love that entire history you just put forth. It reminds me, I was just Googling one of my favorite quotes from Milton Friedman, and Milton says, inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon, in the sense that it is, meaning inflation is, and can be produced only by a more rapid increase in the quantity of money than in output. And I know that's economists speak, but if we boil that down and just think about it super simply, let's think about all of the stimulus, the $20 trillion in stimulus or whatever happened around COVID, whatever that dollar amount was. So that was a rapid increase in the quantity of money. And at the same time, was output going up or creation of product going up? No, it was going down, right? Because we had the supply chain disruptions and the lockdowns and everything. So you had a rapid increase in the supply of money. You had a decrease in the amount of output or production, and you got this crazy inflation that's now going all around the world. And people, like, a really easy way for people to think about this is, look what happened to the values of homes, right? We made super cheap 2.5% mortgages. We helicoptered money to businesses and people all over the country in the United States. And then we took away all the supply chains that builders needed to build homes. It's literally the definition of inflation. And for the US government and the Fed to say, this is really surprising. We thought this was going to be transitory. We're surprised how little we know about inflation. Please, I mean, come on. You had to know that was going to happen.
Yeah, it's true. And I think also one part that's never discussed is that globalization, which means they basically opened up the East, i.e. China, India, Bangladesh, and suddenly all of these items and products and stuff like that were then exported to the West, these kind of these market economies, and we imported deflation. So we were printing money, and they're like, well, we're trying to ease here, but we can't get the inflation rate up. We're building up debts, but the inflation rate's not gone up to burn off the debts. And they kept doing more and more of it. And really what they were doing is they're importing deflation as well, which is a counterweight to the inflation, the monetary inflation. And now China, guess what? China is not exporting deflation anymore. They have their own large market economy. They're not as cheap as they used to be. And the prices aren't falling as much as they did. And now we're left with this enormous amount of debt. And you can measure debt as a relative number to GDP. And back at the original global financial crisis back in 2007, 8, 9, debt to GDP globally was 240%. It's now 340% and climbing. So on a relative basis, we are up to our oxters, our necks in debt. And with interest rates going up, that puts extraordinary pressures. So an interest rate move today is like maybe 2 or 3 equivalent moves 10, 20 years ago. Right. It's markedly more impactful. And what's interesting now, I think, is that even though we have inflation burning hot, even historically, with this amount of debt and this amount of money that's been printed, I don't know what this looks like going forward. I mean, this inflation could be sticky, a lot stickier than people think. It could even spike higher before it comes lower. I don't know. It's not necessarily just an energy function. Energy is a big part of it, but I think the monetary system is a big part of it. And I think most people today on the street have never actually experienced inflation. They don't have any institutional memory of the 70s when it got really, really ugly, where people were forced to do 3-day weeks. The rubbish was piling up in the streets in Europe. People couldn't even get buried in places like the UK. They had bodies like, just not, normal like funeral services weren't able to be processed. So it can get very strange, very odd, and it can create very unusual kind of vectors in our economy that we need to watch out for. And I don't think people today really have a clue. So I'm watching for next 2023. I think it's going to be really interesting to see what happens with the consumer. Watch the consumer.
Very interesting. The other thing you mentioned was, fiat currencies can be okay if governments have constraints on spending, or I believe you said something like that. And I just wanted to share really quickly, those of you listening on a podcast won't be able to listen, but those of you watching on YouTube or some other video format, you'll be able to see my screen here. And this is the US debt clock.
I love this.
I mean, if you want something to scare the shit out of you, this should do the trick. I mean, I don't know anything scarier than this. When you start to break this down, and the debt clock shows we owe as a country over $31 trillion. Of course, there's all these additional debts that aren't even included in that, like Medicare. So they've got these unfunded. Yep, exactly. But when you start to look at this, debt per taxpayer, it starts to get really, really scary. And then you've got, you mentioned debt to GDP. I think you were mentioning that internationally, right? Globally.
Yeah.
But if you look at debt to GDP in the US, in the 60s was a 50% ratio. In the 80s, we were down to 30. We're up to over 120%. And so it's just frightening. And the interest on the debt, goodness gracious. This is a really fun place to spend some time.
I nerd out on that all the time. I have it on my phone. I love it. There's a place that if you scroll down, I don't know, I was going to wing it here, but you scroll down, the average wage back in 2000 versus 22, and the average house and the average car. Is that a section there on that? It should be down in the lower half of that, on the right side, if I recall.
Oh, okay.
Average wage between 2 different years. Basically, the average US wage has only increased a small amount. I think it's like 32,000 to like 38,000 or something. Very small. But the average house has gone up twofold, or 200%. And the average car has gone up about, 200% as well. So the real impact on people's lives of affordability, like having a house, having a car, they've been impoverished. They have not participated in terms of wages, real wages. What they have done is taken on a lot of debt, more debt than they ever had before. And so interest rates, again, if they're going up, debt looks great if it's really cheap, but not when it's going up. And that impacts consumer. We haven't seen that second shoe drop yet. What's going to happen with the consumer? When will they tighten their belts? And if they do en masse, what does that look like?
Yeah, here's where it is. Right here, Stephen, you're right. It says median income now, 36,000, median income in 2000, 32,000, and the median home price, 168,000 in 2000, median home price today, 443,000. And that just goes to speak about your previous point around, as interest fluctuates now, since there's so much more debt, it has a massively increased ramification, because the interest rate fluctuation is on 3 or 4 times as much debt.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Okay.
It's the middle classes and the lower classes who are getting nailed. And if you look at the share of wealth, who is it? Ray Dalio, he's got some great charts where he shows the percentage of wealth. You've probably seen this. The last time the wealth share of the top 10% or top 1%, whatever it is, equaled the bottom 50%. The last time that they equaled was back in the 1930s. And that level of unfairness, whatever you want to call it, inequality, Gini coefficient or something like that, it's never been as bad since the 1930s. And what happened in the 1930s? Well, people got angry and they voted in crazy people to do crazy things, and we lost control. So they get this better get it. Well, I don't think they can actually bring it under control. I think that they've created this monster. They can't stop inflation if they can't raise rates. They can't raise rates because they owe too much money, and a big portion of tax then has to go to paying the debt. So all the central banks are in a really, really bad place right now. They're trapped. So I don't know what the next stage is, but it's not looking too good.
Yeah, there's a lot of writings around the end game of that debt cycle, and essentially once you get into that spiral, it's hard to get out, and the only way to really get out is some sort of a massive reset. So I think that's going to bring us to a little more discussion around gold here in a minute. But I wanted to ask you before we go to that, tell us a little bit more about how you think about inflation, how it impacts your investment decisions. I'd also love to hear a little bit from you, from your perspective, because, in Europe, they don't have these 30-year fixed mortgages. And so give us just your perspective on inflation and how you think it impacts both investments and how you take out debt.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you have debt, inflation's your friend, because it burns away the debt, basically. But you have to look at the real rate too. If you've got a high inflation and you're not beating that number, you're still growing your debt unless you can pay it back some other way. So I think inflation at 10% for people who have existing mortgages at lower rates, it's not a bad thing, as long as you're able to pay your bills. Mm-hmm. Let that do its work. There's I don't know if you ever come across this, the rule of 72.
Oh yeah.
I love this. So an inflation rate of 10% into 72, 7 years, you had $100,000 and you have an inflation rate of 10%. And the rule of 72 says that in 7 years, your buying power gets halved. Okay. So that's the effect of a 10% inflation rate. It's a killer to your savings. So if you've got cash sitting under your mattress or sitting in a bank and it's earning zip, and at an inflation rate of 10% means you're literally just handing the central bankers 10% of your money, and you pay tax on that, so you're getting taxed again. It's horrendous. So I don't think you should be in cash, but there is an argument to be in cash in one scenario, and that is if you think that there's going to be some sort of event, there's going to be some sort of market repricing. That stocks and assets have been very much interest rate sensitive and interest rate supported. And if interest rates go up, those assets probably or may not have the same type of valuation that they had before. Yeah. If you own gold and everyone else on your street doesn't own any gold, and there's a 50% markdown some week, you open up your newspaper, you open up CNN, whatever it is, and they say, hey, there's a bank holiday enforced this Monday. The banks aren't opening because of a crisis, whatever it is. There's blood on the street. Stock market's gapped down. The guys, the treasury is out on out in the plinth, and they're trying to calm people down. We've got this under control, and the stock markets are selling off. If you have cash, then you can pick up great bargains. Those who don't have gold in their portfolio, I would surmise, will panic because they look at maybe the first 50% down, and then they're looking at going from 50% down to zero. They're looking at getting washed out completely. But the person who has gold is seeing that go up in value because it responds to crises. And if that's going up, it's taking the sting out of the correction. This is the purpose of gold. It's not to make you money. It is to calm you down. It's like a stiff drink. It takes the edge off. It allows you to see things clearly, and you can then take advantage and you can pick up assets at bargain basements, probably never to be seen again prices, because you have taken stock. You've got that insurance built into your diversified portfolio. So you don't own gold to make money. You own gold to calm you down, to diversify, and that's what you want. That's its purpose in life. And you'll never hear any other dealer or anyone in the markets tell you that. That's from GoldCore. That's 20 years of experience dealing with our customers. We learn that from our customers. That's its purpose.
And so explain to us, connect the dots really, if you would. How would you typically expect gold or other hard assets to perform during times of elevated inflation? And how has gold performed over the last, let's call it 24 months, we've been seeing inflation rise?
Well, this year it's been fairly benign. I think it's like 5% year to date in 2022. It's not a whole lot. It hasn't really gone on fire. It's an interesting thing. Gold tends to move medium term with consumer stress, and the consumers haven't reacted as badly as people thought they might. They're only seeing interest rates moving up now for the first time. We haven't had rising rates for a long time. I think it's, I don't know what the number is, but it's going back 10 something years plus. So there's a bit of newness to this, and they haven't seen inflation since their grandparents, or their elderly parents back in the 70s. So it's an interesting time. I think we're really busy. We have a lot of people buying precious metals in the UK, in Ireland, in the United States as well. We have 2 offices over there, and we are busy out. And I think our clients look at this and go, the price is really, really cheap, and they expect gold to go an awful lot higher. That being said, it could go lower. There's no guarantees, and I don't want people to buy on that basis. It's going to go up. The position for it is to have it as part of a diversified portfolio. So I think you're going to see gold react on an inflation basis once the inflation pain hits the street. That's when people start to pull back on their expenditure, and they suddenly realize inflation's got up 10%. My wages aren't moving at all. My job security just took a hit because they're not hiring anymore. And suddenly tech workers are getting laid off. Maybe the industrial workers are going to get laid off. Next, service workers might get laid off. I don't know. And maybe the problem with employment just suddenly flips around the other way. So I think the next chapter in this is just beginning. And I would expect gold to react very positively to that, and silver as well. So I think they're going to move up higher. Again, no guarantees.
Yeah, no, I totally understand. I think you're right. My feeling is that as we move forward, there's a very high likeliness that the U.S. is headed towards a recession, and I think the Fed will pivot. And part of the reason why gold hasn't moved markedly higher is just the resilience and strength of the dollar. But as the U.S. enters a recession, as the Fed pivots and potentially reverses course, I think that'll be a really good time for gold. And I think I have to say that because I own a lot of gold. So, if I didn't think that, I would be doubting myself there.
I have a question for you, Josh. I have a question for you. You're a worldly man. What would you think the average annualized return on gold since the turn of the century, since 2000 to now, 22 years?
Wow. I'm going to totally screw this up, but I would go somewhere in line with inflation. So I bet I'm going to be low here, but maybe 4 or 5%.
It's about 10%.
10%
annualized. Now, if you look at all currencies in the world, they're all around 9 to 12% annualized since the year 2000. That's unbelievable. It's one of the best performing assets out there. And it doesn't have anywhere near the volatility financial advisor types like to tarnish it with. And it is actually ridiculous because it's a piece of metal. It does nothing. It doesn't make stuff. It just sits there and gathers dust. it shouldn't be anywhere near as valued as it is if we were actually honest and we worked hard and we didn't, misallocate precious resources like our capital and our human labor. But because we're human beings and we don't do things correctly and we can be corrupted, then we have something like gold. And what gold is, and this is really important to understand, it allows you as an investor to step back from the financial system, to say, you know what, Mr. Government, I'm going to give you your dollars and I'm going to take my gold and I'm going to sit outside the system completely. And I'm going to sit this one out until you get control of things properly again. And in that sense, it gives you financial sovereignty. It gives you the option to step away from the system and vote with your money and vote out. And so our clients, they hold gold. We have 11 vaults around the world. They hold bars, kilo bars, and bigger and smaller on the shelf in Zurich, outside the bank system completely. So they are sitting it out, waiting to see what happens. And that's the way. It gives them pure sovereignty. So 10% annualized return, that's no bad thing. And it just shows the way the currencies have been abused. Those currencies have gone down 10% a year relative to gold. It's not gold's going up, they're going down.
That's exactly the way to think of it. I completely agree with you. Well, there's no shortage of potential international crisis going on between China shutdowns, the rioting they had a few weeks ago or last week, what's going on with Russia. We just had the FTX cryptocurrency meltdown that set a whole cascading effect of challenges through cryptocurrency. So maybe you could just give us your take around all those geopolitical risks, and then also that kind of financial risk that one has when they put their money in trust of something like a Bitcoin, and tell us how you think gold relates to that.
It's a big question. So geopolitically around the world, there's a number of different things happening. Obviously, there's the whole monetary side of things. So all these currencies have they've competitively debased their currencies because the dollar got debased. They had to debase as well. Otherwise, the dollar would have been far too powerful, more powerful, cheaper. All the goods would have flooded out internationally, and they would have lost competitiveness. So there's a competitive currency devaluation going on, has done for a long time. All dollar-based, all dollar originated, Fed originated, which is owned by the banks in the States. So that being the case, you have a number of things happening. I think probably the big stories, if I was to identify a number of them, is the weaponization of the monetary system. And we saw that with Iran. We saw that with Bank Paribas a few years ago. They got knocked out of the dollar window by the New York AG. And that was a weaponization of the dollar for arguably political purposes. They did it with Iran once, and then they did it with Russia. And when they weaponized the dollar and they took away their central bank reserves and they banned them from the SWIFT clearing mechanism, and I mean, Russian tourists were on holidays on the beach in various parts of the world. Suddenly their Visa cards didn't work. They couldn't pay their hotel bills. They couldn't get their families back home because of something that they weren't directly involved in. Now, wherever you are on the conflict, the weaponization of the reserve currency of the world for political reasons, and it is, you have to say it, changes the chessboard completely.
For sure. Now,
places like Venezuela, they can't get their gold back. Brazil, India, China, the incentive is for them to reduce reliability, their reliance on the dollar as a safe currency, acceptable always, and to create their own currency systems. So I fully expect China, as its next step forward, is going to launch its own central bank digital currency, which will be used and made available to foreign entities to enter the debt markets. They will be able to borrow in Chinese renminbi. I think that Chinese renminbi will be heavily backed by gold, not fully backed, but heavily backed. I think the Chinese are accumulating massive amounts of gold right now in order to make this a reality. And they're going to go from a kind of, a workshop of the world to a leading market economy of the world. And that's their plan, is to be the next reserve currency of the world, and to take over the mantle that the United States has had since the 1920s, arguably. So it's changing. It's all changing, and we'll see where it goes. But ultimately, the United States is heavily indebted. They haven't dealt with this as well as they should. They're using the old box of tools, and I think the weaponization of dollar has changed everything.
Really well.
Oh, sorry, FTX. You asked me about FTX and Bitcoin. So my feeling is Elon Musk, FTX, the NASDAQ, all these companies are all benefactors of an ultra low interest rate environment. It's an anomaly over the last 30 years in some ways. This is not a normal market environment. It's basically hyper managed by the authorities who are owned by the banks. Remember, these people who go and serve in the Fed and in the Treasury, they leave those jobs, they go straight back into the banks, and they earn huge amounts of money in fees. They are fully paid servants of the financial system. And their job is to make it as easy as possible for financialization and debt accumulation and the like. I don't think someone like Elon Musk and all of these things would have happened if it wasn't for ultra low interest rate environments. And I think Bitcoin is a massive benefactor of that. Now, there is an element of Bitcoin, which is a libertarian dream, which is currency owned by the people for the people and taking control back. But that is an anxiety that gold also deals with as well and offers something for. And I think there are people who have been kind of brought into it because it's so easy to use and it's cool and it's digital and it's a digital age. And so they like the idea of doing it, but it's actually very expensive. It's not very efficient. It's very old technology, and it doesn't really mimic gold in any real way. And there's one incredibly interesting aspect to Bitcoin and why it will never, ever, ever be any kind of monetary power in its own right, and that is because it can't be flexed. And here's what's interesting: people don't really understand this about money. But if let's say you have a property and you go to your local bank and you say, "I want to borrow money," they say, "Give me collateral." You say, "There's my house." They say, "That asset's worth $1 million. Great, I'll give you $1 million in cash." So what they've done is they've just really animated, for want of a better word, the value inside that house and generated cash. Now they take the house, they give you cash, and you have now given them a illiquid asset and being given liquid asset, which you then can use for something else. Now you see $1 million in your pocket of dollars. You also you think you own that house, but you don't because the bank does. And you go off and you use that money. And that allows you to take a kind of a capital asset and animate it in the economy. Money has to be flexible. That money is generated by the bank. It's created at that bank lending level. When you pay it back, that money gets destroyed. Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies don't do this, not by design today. Maybe in the future. Central bank digital currencies might do this. I don't know. But that's why Bitcoin has failed. In my view, it will never be a proper monetary power because it doesn't have that flex. It can't be collateral. It can't be used in a collateralized debt arrangement. And that's one of the key things. There's a fantastic article on this, and you should write this down, whoever's listening is. One of my competitors, Paul Tustane, he's a UK chap, Paul Tustane, and he's a fantastic mind. And he wrote an article about Bitcoin and money. Search it up online and read it. It's very accessible, very well written, and it explains this concept very, very clearly, far better than I can.
How do I spell his last name?
Tustane, Tustain, Tustane. I know he won't mind me mentioning it, but he has that in the public realm.
I'll Google it and put it in the show notes.
Yeah, you'd love it. It's great.
Stephen, this has been fascinating. I know it's a good interview when I feel like, we could go another hour, but we're running out of time. And so let me just allow you, if you would please, or invite you, if you would please, just tell us a little bit more about what GoldCore does and then where they can find information and get to GoldCore.
Super. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Essentially, our website is goldcore.com. And when you go in there, there's phone numbers you can call up. And what a lot of clients will do is they'll do a strategy session where we'll have a questions and answers with them. We'll figure out what their needs are, and we'll figure out what type of product is best for those to suit those needs. And we don't do pump and dump kind of loss leader type of product offerings. We don't sell numismatic coins or anything like that. So essentially, we try to get the best price product for the client that meets their needs. So do a strategy session. You can go onto GoldCore.com, open up an account in 3 minutes if you wish, or call or email us, and we'll go through that. What we did though recently, and I think you'll like this, Josh, is we launched a second website called goldintheusa.com, goldintheusa.com, in honor of the boss, Bruce Springsteen, born in the
I love it.
goldintheusa.com. And in there's a guide, and it has all of the top things you need to know if you want to get into the gold market, because most people haven't a clue. So you download that guide. There's some really good tips in there. Very, very straightforward. You don't have to use us. There's lots of good dealers out there. But we have that guide up there for our US customers. You can download that, and we'll send you an email as well if you wish, and then you can engage with us. But it's a fantastic resource. But we store, basically, we don't do any kind of derivatives. Everything we sell is physical bullion on the shelf, high quality. You can open an account in 3 to 5 minutes. You can then buy a gold bar in Switzerland if you want, or London or Dublin or in Utah. We do an awful lot of storage in Utah, and we deliver as well. So we've been around for a long time. So you're in safe hands.
Well, it's a great way to get some fiat currency into a hard asset, and also have it held outside of the United States. So it's a double security blanket in that regard. I just went on to the website, Gold in the USA. I see there's a 5-point checklist there. So I will download that. I'm going to read through it. I'm going to put it as a link on our show notes. And Stephen, thank you so much, my friend. It's been you're a wealth of knowledge. I appreciate everything you shared so generously with us here today.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was time flew by. You're easy to talk to. We should definitely, if you come to Ireland, we'll meet up and have a pint of Guinness somewhere, and we'll chat.
I would love that very much. I'm going to hold you up for that.